it was working. The clickers for Alicia. Thank you. There you go. I just want to acknowledge the, so this fiscal year is coming to an end. Acknowledge our current board of directors. Wait, my clicker. No, it was working. Sabotage. I'll go through. So our current board of directors, we have Dana Nimoto Shima. Can you stand, please? She's one of our directors. We also have Simone Simbeck, also here, one of our directors. George Takase, another director. Okay, you guys don't have to sit together. You guys can mingle, you know. Nimmer Tamimi, he's not here today, I don't believe. He's our national director. We have our past president, Kyle Kanashiro. Thank you, Kyle. Tim Goshi, he's our secretary. I think he's registered. There he is. Okay, Tim Goshi. Our treasurer, Kelo Hisandafer, also on that table. Myself, I am president-elect, and our fabulous president, Miss Shannon Holman. Hold for yeah. And we can never forget our executive director, Ginny Wright. Now, normally we do past presidents in attendance, but there's a lot of people here today, so I'm sorry, I don't have the list of all of our distinguished guests, our past presidents in attendance. But if you may indulge us, if you wouldn't mind, please standing and being recognized as one of our past presidents. I do see Derek, Jeff, Dennis, Sean. Thank you. Okay, so announcements of upcoming events. We have our ACECH symposium next month, May 15th. This is being chaired by Dawn and co-chaired by Shannon. We have a lot of, I'm sorry, Shannon, I don't know if you want to give as you eat your food, if you know better, if you want to give any sales pitch on the symposium. I do know that we have a lot of great speakers lined up.
Registration just opened. I believe the invitation was sent out yesterday. It's going to be Thursday, May 15th. It's going to actually be starting earlier this year because we have so many fabulous speakers. We have our neighboring islands coming over as well. I think Ernie Lau, who's here. Thank you for joining us, Ernie. Ernie's going to be out presenting as well, so he's committed to it. So we have folks from Board of Water Supply, DDC, WEC, County of Hawaii, County of Kauai, County of Maui, everywhere in the state of Hawaii. So we do this every 2 years, so it's a great event to come out and network with your fellow colleagues, to connect with your fellow colleagues and share, our experiences and our knowledge so that we can be better engineers in our profession. So please join us. Early bird registration is, Jenny, when is early bird registration end? Is it May 1st? So that's next Thursday. So please come out and join us. Thanks. Oh, sorry, April 30th.
I asked Shannon before this, you have anything you want to talk about? She said no. That's what happens when you don't have a script. We also have coming up next month, the National ACEC Annual Convention and Legislative Summit is in Washington, D.C. So we're going to be well represented. Hawaii will be well represented this year. Shannon Holman, myself, Dana will be attending, as well as Nimmer from the board. And I believe that we have, I'm sorry, was it Scott, Jenny, and somebody else, Janice Marsters, members of our organization will be there with us as well. And this is open to anybody. So, I mean, the early bird has passed, but it's still available if, any of our membership wants to come. And there is a discount for first-time attendees. I wanted to do a recap. Last month, we had our Engineering Excellence Awards banquet. It was actually here at the JCC, just recognizing some of the great projects that had won some awards. We had RM Towel with the Honolulu wastewater treatment plant. That was the Grand Conceptor, and it was also the People's Choice Awards. So they won double that night. Excellence Awards went to Orion Engineers, Wilson Okamoto, and Honor Awards to C Engineering and Engineering Partners. So this event also, I wanted to be able to recognize the work that our chairs are doing, because a lot of the things that they're doing for the organization is unnoticed. And so I tried to make it a point to point out, who's the chairs, who's the ones really driving these efforts that are happening. So chairing this EEA this past year was Carly Kaneko with co-chair Deanna Hayashi. That night, we didn't only just honor, if you did attend, we did have a good amount of attendees, so many of you are probably here, but for those who are not, we didn't just honor projects this year, we honored a few individuals. If you're unaware, Ginny Wright, our executive director, who's been our executive director for many, many, many years and really kind of had that continuity for our organization, she will be retiring at the end of, she'll be retiring on June 30th, but she'll be interim executive director until the end of the year until we can get somebody to fill her shoes. So she was, Ginny had let us know for a while now that she was looking to retire. Lucky for us, she's agreed to stay on for 6 more months to help us transition. So we honored Ginny. We also honored David Bills. Dave Bills is our PAC champion for ACECH. Also for many, many years, he's been the one really driving us meeting our political action committee goals for national through not only asking our membership for donations to that, but also donating very hefty on his own. And then lastly, we honored Lester Fukuda. He wasn't in attendance that day, but his son accepted the award for him for all of his hard work. I'm sorry, what was the call? Yeah, thank you. So actually, National had presented Lester with an award for National QBS, qualifications-based selection. Upcoming events, additional upcoming events are general membership meeting in June is going to be on Kauai. It's going to be similar if you went to the Big Island one. It's going to be GMM in the morning. The mayor is going to be speaking, and then we're going to have golf networking after that. This one is chaired by our Kauai, this being put together by our Kauai committee chair, Jason Soriano, and vice chair, Craig Otani. One of the initiatives that our board is also doing this year under the leadership of Shannon is we are looking at a strategic plan. And National has done one. It feels like it's the right time for Hawaii to be doing one, especially with the transition of our executive director. It does feel like there is a change in the workforce. So right now, the board is starting the motions to start a strategic plan. We have high aspirations to get this done quickly. And under the leadership of Shannon, I'm sure we will. And then lastly, before we get into our speaker, I just wanted to give some committee updates. Just what are some of these committees that you folks are maybe not aware, what's happening, just to keep the membership informed. The Honolulu Board of Water Supply Committee that's chaired by Brian Sekiguchi. In one of our recent meetings, the Honolulu Board of Water Supply had shared with the organization one of their newest memos. And the memo is essentially allowing for consultant rate increases on contract amendments. So this is a great thing. It is allowing us to use updated DAGS rates when we're doing an amendment on an existing contract. So, the Board of Water Supply Committee, this is one of our most consistent committees. They meet consistently all the time. That's because of our great partners at Board of Water Supply. They attend with multiple people. The conversations are engaging, and so wanted to thank the Board of Water Supply and also thank Brian Sekiguchi for that great work. One of our other committees that meets very regularly and maintains a really good relationship in terms of meeting bi-monthly, I believe, is our WEC committee, our Wastewater Engineering and Construction Committee. That one is chaired by Garrett Leong. There's a lot of good open conversation in that. Actually, the conversations in that committee was sort of the genesis for this GMM. There are conversations about standard of care. There are conversations about expectation of perfection. And as always, there's always talks about consultant rates and permitting and things like that. So Garrett's doing a fantastic job on that. Excuse me. Our DAGS committee, I'm sure everybody's aware, our DAGS rates are set to expire, I guess, in a sense, at June 30th of this year. So Tyson Toyama is the chair for that. He's working with DAGS right now to try to get us new DAGS rates for the next 4 years. I'm aware that he's also having conversations with them about the multiplier, because a lot of our overhead is different now, especially with cybersecurity and all the other things that we have to do, all this technology. And I did want to thank any of the member firms that did respond to Ginny's request for the salary survey. The salary survey is important. It gives us a basis to be able to talk to DAGs and start to negotiate those rates. And then I wanted to recognize Dean Nakano for his work on the City and County of Honolulu committee. This committee is very daunting. It's intimidating. I sit in it once in a while. There's so many different players that come from the city here. Board of Water Supply, even though they have their own committee, will sit in it. We have DPP, DDC. We have all of these different people, and Dean does a great job at keeping people engaged. Enough that this meeting occurs monthly, right? It occurs every month. So these are kind of some of the things we wanted to make sure, to really thank our chairs, to recognize them, because especially these committee chairs and these committee meetings, that's really the lifeblood of ACECH. It keeps that conversation open with our agencies and towards us as well. Is this like the Oscar thing, like your speech is over? Okay, there you go. And now our feature presentation. Is Jerry on? Okay, so we're gonna get our speaker on, and then I'm gonna transition over to Alicia. Just give us a couple minutes to get him back on the Zoom call, and then the Zoom pulled up. Otherwise, Kyle, you have anything as past president, now that you're exiting? Any words of wisdom for future board of directors or anything? No.
Hi, Jerry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, awesome.
you're-
And we can hear you. You know
you're
what we
com-
didn't test was sharing your screen.
I I was trying to tell you that, but you got
Oh,
rid of me too
I
quick.
Typical. Yeah.
Well, I'm an Italian from the Bronx, so this is what's known as you get to see the sausage being made. So
Okay. Well, I have your long bio, so I'll get started. So you have the full hour to talk. And I just learned that your name is Gerard. I
yeah.
think we've been working together for 8 years, and you've always been Jerry to me. So Gerard Cavaluzzi is Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary for Kennedy Jenks, a national environmental and engineering consultancy. He's also Chief Risk Officer and a member of the Kennedy Jenks Senior Leadership Team, responsible for providing legal services as well as strategic business, contracting, and risk management advice to all levels of the organization, including Alicia at 9 o'clock your time. During his career, he has had extensive involvement with resolving professional liability and related insurance issues, regulatory compliance, and handling administrative and court proceedings. As an industry recognized expert in the area of contracts, including construction contract drafting, construction claim analysis and resolution, professional liability, and risk management, Jerry has utilized his experience on some of the industry's most complex public sector construction projects. He presents to clients, agencies, and industry groups on collaborative delivery throughout the U.S. and developed award-winning ACEC Essentials of Risk Management course that he leads every year. So sign up. Jerry is a skilled and experienced mediator and dispute Review Board panel member, actively supporting real-time and project-related solutions. Jerry has particular expertise in contract development services. He supports client counsel with drafting, negotiating, and interpreting project construction documents, advancing procurement and contracting strategies, and developing client program delivery tools for collaborative delivery projects such as design build, progressive design build, CMGC, EPC, and public-private partnerships. Risk management, he provides capital construction project risk management consulting services to clients, working together with their counsel and insurance advisors. These services also include assistance with project management, plan review and negotiation, change order and claims analysis, and risk management advice concerning insurance coverage and recovery, and also dispute resolution. He provides claims management activities such as pre-claims evaluations and construction claims or dispute resolution, including serving as the DRB panel member. Additionally, claims mitigation activities include providing timely reviews, advice, and dispute resolution for large construction program management and capital delivery projects. I learned all of this by reading his bio today. Jerry is a past chair of ACEC Legal Counsel Forum and has also been an active contributor to that and the Engineers Joint Contract Documents Committee for more than 35 years. I'm 35. Jerry received a BA from Marist College and is a graduate of Fordham University School of Law, where he received his Juris Doctorate. He's licensed to practice law in New York, Connecticut, and DC. Jerry is also on the board of directors of the American Corporate Counsel Association, Westchester Southern Connecticut chapter. That's a lot of letters. And as well as chair of Compliance Group Roundtable. So please join me in welcoming Jerry from New York.
That's a lot. What's not in my bio is
I've proved my reading abilities of contracts and your bio.
What's not in my bio is that how I got to really love engineers is because my older brother Nick is a professional engineer, and I was the youngest of 4 boys, and Nick would always go to sleep with his engineering books under his pillow. He went to Manhattan College, and I literally grew up in the Bronx. And if you live in New York, there's always construction going on. And Nick was the resident engineer for the Cross Bronx Expressway that was going on. And I just thought it was really neat because every Friday they would, this is before partnering, have a big, literally a lunch with the whole site was there. And if you live in New York, Arthur Avenue is the part of the Bronx which has the best Italian food. And the whole project would sit down and shut down while they had this great feast. And I just thought, wow, this is really great. You come here, you eat, you build things, and everybody was happy. And then I became a lawyer, and I found out that it was a little bit different. And so today I really want to share with you, I'm not focusing on the bane of my existence with contracts. What I really want to focus on is what contracts should be promoting. And what contracts should be promoting is really the project success. But just remember, project success is all about people. And even though I spend most of my life dealing with contracts, what I've realized throughout the years, in the 30-something years, that if you get to the point where you're sitting there looking at the contract, giving you answers on a project, that project is a failure. Meaning, if you're looking at the letter of the contract and you haven't figured out how to meet the project expectations of the client, of the public, of the regulatory agencies, you're going to have a problem with feeling good about that project success. So I don't know how to start the slides, Alicia. Is it supposed to be loaded here for me, or what? How does that work? There.
I'll figure something out right now.
All right.
I lost my mouse up there.
Okay.
Charles, can you come back over here, please?
If I need to access it through my shared drive, I can do it that way. Is that the simplest way of doing it?
Yeah, that would. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, thanks.
Wait me a second.
You know what? It's going to cover his face if he doesn't share it.
If he doesn't share.
If he doesn't share, then it'll cover
Oh.
the video, which might be okay. So it's up to him if he wants to.
Oh, I can.
Otherwise,
If you,
No, I can share
you-
from this other screen. I think.
yeah,
Oh,
if you,
yeah,
if you could,
Oh,
if you could do that, that would be better. But I can
Yeah.
pull it up.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can do this. Share. Glad this part is recorded.
Don't worry, I'll make it up. Oh, I see it.
Oh,
And so,
Oh, I
so
see. Okay, wait.
it's coming up good for me.
Okay,
are you
hold on.
going to
Let me
advance?
unspotlight you.
Are you going to advance the slides?
I will now stop spotlighting. Oh, 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 I see what you're saying. Let me figure something out. Of course, of course.
What does stop spotlighting mean? Oh,
Oh, I'm sharing the wrong screen now.
yeah, you were doing good before. So while she's getting that, I'm used to covering for Alicia. Part of my job. That's why we talk every night. So really, when you look at the title here, and I started off the conversation talking about expectations. And really, when you talk about expectations, you need to be clearly identifying what are the project goals, and
Can I
if
make
you're a
this
client or an agency, what do you hope to accomplish, and more importantly, who's accountable for what?
As long as I can bring it up on this side,
Yeah.
then it's gonna be smaller. Yeah.
Oh, I know. I can share from my.
We could work
Jerry,
to
you
work
start
with that.
talking, and I will figure this out while you are talking.
So it's interesting that, at my firm,
I'll bring it up from my phone.
we're spending a lot of time talking about accountability. And we're doing that for a reason, because we don't exist without clients, and we don't exist unless we have projects that are successful. And what we've realized is that in order for us to achieve what we consider to be a successful project, roles and responsibilities of the various parties need to be identified right up front. And as a firm of professional engineers and scientists and other associated professionals, we are committed to client satisfaction. But what does that really mean? And what are the expectations that clients have when they go into projects? So the source of my discussion today, and it's meant to be thought provocative and not to go through all the contract clauses, but what are the key elements that go into expectations on a project? And how do you achieve those expectations? And how do you hold people accountable for when they don't achieve those expectations? And to me, it all comes down to communication and forming relationships. So with that introduction, Alicia, you can go to the next slide. Or I go to the next slide. Go to the agenda. So what are the key concepts that we're going to talk about that are related to establishing expectations and holding folks accountable? And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the professional standard of care. As clients and agencies and as engineers, it's important that everyone understands what that is, because that's the bar to which we're judged as professionals. We'll necessarily talk about insurability and why that matters and why that's related to standard of care. What are reasonable expectations that engineers should rise up and fulfill in order to have the project be successful? And what about the various superlatives and the various warranties and standards that folks believe should be imposed upon the various parties to the project? And how do you hold the engineer accountable? Because we're the ones, at the end of the day, I said I grew up with my brother who's a PE. That license is to protect public health and safety. It's a tremendous responsibility. Similarly, our clients at agencies, municipalities are stewards of the public. and they have responsibilities too to fulfill. And it's important that we understand our respective responsibilities and that we could close the gap. Oops, we lost everything there, Alicia. We can close the gap between the two, or more importantly, establish what we need to achieve on a project at the outset and make sure that we have communications throughout the project. We'll talk about a little bit about how to establish these reasonable expectations more from an awareness standpoint, and why it's really in the best interest of both the project and the client and the engineer to be all on the same page on aligning themselves. And I think that at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is create much more realism in the project. We like to think that sometimes we promise what we need to do in order to win the project. That's not necessarily in the best interest of the project. More importantly, we should be really taking to heart what the project goals are and how we can achieve those goals in a collaborative manner, working together. My example of growing up in the Bronx, that was done every Friday with those lunches. It brought the client, it brought the contractors, it brought the engineers together, in an atmosphere where people were sitting together, working out whatever the problems were of that week, and they were doing it in a way that wasn't a letter writing campaign and didn't require them to look at the contract every 5 minutes to get their answer. It was a collaborative environment, and it promoted solutions. So let's talk about standard of care. And Alicia is the recipient of my Snoopy gifts every holiday. And this is one of the ones where, as a non-engineer, it always gives me pause when I start to see cracks. And I always love when our structural people tell me that cracks are normal and you should expect that. Well, as a client, I'm sure that's one of those things that you sit there and say, really? And this cartoon is really, I think, a little bit true in terms of, yeah, but really I would like to look at the engineer's plans and see, is this really surface or there's structural issues there? So obviously this is said in jest, but this does cause people to wonder, and I still have trouble with the cracks on my walls. Next slide. What are some of the things that I'm sure may have been raised, but where I sit, I've heard a lot from clients mostly, and I spend most of my time listening to clients because they're not necessarily real happy. And part of this presentation was to understand the sources of why clients are unhappy and what we can do to achieve a better level of success on our projects. I think part of it comes from misunderstandings on what expectations are reasonable from your professional. And remember, an engineer is like a lawyer and a doctor. The standard of care is that of a professional. So when you put in clauses or you have discussions about a guarantee being defect free, you're already misaligning yourself. If there's a belief that when there's a change order that comes through, it's got to be someone else's fault, something had to be wrong with the project, that if there's an RFI that's issued, that obviously that engineer, he or she didn't know what they were doing, and that's a sign that there's defects. When you put in clauses because you are held to tight budgets and you figure, okay, well, I'll just hold some party responsible, and you say, let's make the engineer responsible to make sure that the bids won't exceed budget. These are all recipes for failure. And we'll talk a little bit why, because many of these things are outside the control of the party that's being held responsible. Contractors build the projects. Let's make sure we have the engineer ensure that the contractor builds the project correctly. Let's talk about all project costs, and I have this much budgeted for a project, and therefore anything extra, there's extra costs, the engineer is responsible for paying that, or in some cases the contractor is. Well, sometimes there's costs that should have been included, but the mistake was made. And if it should have been included originally, the owner doesn't get that item for free. So if you made a mistake and you didn't include an extra clarifier, and it turns out that clarifier was required, you should still be responsible as the engineer for the additional cost if the clarifier wasn't included in the project to begin with. The owner doesn't get the clarifier for free, because the original design would have included that clarifier. The owner should get the delta, the difference in the costs if it was included from the beginning, extra construction costs, extra delays, all those things are legitimate costs. But the betterment concept is saying, hey, the owner is being enriched by this. It's a betterment. You don't get it for free. But that's what that talks about. But there's a belief there that if something happens and it costs extra money, then someone's got to pay for it. And it's not necessarily so. Other things that we saw in the green building world was, requirements that you're going to achieve a certain LEED certification. But we all know that there's a lot of factors that go into that. And this is probably the biggest myth, that you have insurance, so aren't you covered? And the truth of the matter is, insurance covers fortuitous things, not things that you're covering everything. It's certain things, and we'll talk a little bit about why you can't look to insurance to solve all your problems. What you need to look at is not only yourselves in terms of your expectations, but having the parties agree from the outset as to what the project requirements are, and more importantly, from the beginning, how you meet those requirements. So the list of mistaken expectations long. That's only a few. I'm sure you can come up with a lot of your own where you've learned the hard way in projects that what you had as an expectation really wasn't realistic. So when we talk about the next slide, the standard of care, what really should the clients and agencies understand and expect, and what really engineers should not shy away from. I love that highway to perfection. I've never ridden that highway. Leisha's heard me say I'm one of those people that tries to not make the same mistake twice and make different mistakes on projects, because there's no perfect project. There's no perfect human being that I met yet. And so what is, though, appropriate and expected, and what is really meant by the standard of care? And it's a good review here, because it's the legal standard that governs our performance as engineers. And it's not what you may think, it's what in the industry, what you should expect from professionals performing those services. Next slide. So that really talks about accountability. This is something that if an engineer has a problem with accepting that first bullet, that person shouldn't be an engineer. And that's a bold statement as far as I'm concerned, but it's one that I know that professionals will willingly assume. I have the responsibility as a lawyer to act in accordance with the professional standards of care that govern lawyers. That's the measure for me. Same thing with a doctor, same thing with an engineer. Those are things that we as a firm do not ever disclaim. And frankly, there's a PE license that goes beyond it. So in many instances, if there's an allegation of negligence, the PE board gets notified about that. I know that's the case in California. So that it is very serious. The professions are responsible for policing themselves, and I think do a fairly good job. And clients have a reasonable expectation that the standard of professionalism is going to be exhibited in all aspects of their project. Now, this is something that does evolve over time. We'll give some examples. Contract terms can change the standard and even elevate it, but understand that the way you prove for a professional that he or she committed malpractice is that you need another professional who looks at it as a third party and says, you didn't meet the standard of care, that there was a deficiency in your services that did not meet the expectations of the profession. And that's not necessarily the client's expectations, but the expectations of the profession. And that's where you have to get an alignment together, because that's where a lot of misunderstanding, in my experience, happens. And you start that discussion from almost the beginning of when you enter into not only the contract, but as we'll see later, I'm really urging people to sit down together as a team, similar to those Friday lunches, and talk about what the expectations are from each party, whether it be the engineer in delivering performance, whether it be the client in making decisions and being reasonable in how they administer the project. Next slide. And Alicia, you're going to have to remind me where you're going to jump in and
I
talk.
will, but and everyone's gonna bear with me while I multitask all these things.
That's okay.
All right.
You've learned
So
from the
aren't
best.
all errors negligent errors? Nope, they are not all negligent. So we'll talk about that here. I'll tell myself next slide. All right. So we talk about the standard of care evolving all the time. At the time that this was specified, I wasn't born yet, I don't think. But there was this specification for fire retardant plywood. I would go and buy that. And you know how well that went, because obviously it proved really not to be fire retardant. But the poor engineers that were involved with this. So the standard of care may not have been violated, but then you get lawsuits like many years later, and what you need to prove is that at the time and the place that the services were rendered, it was reasonable that the engineers fulfilled their duty to the public and to the client and to the project. But hindsight's always 2020. In this instance, clearly there was a mistake, but is that legally negligence? We would need to have an expert to testify that at that time, the engineer deviated from the standard of care, and it was wrong for that engineer to have specified that. But that's for an issue, you know, for us to figure out. Let me figure out how to next slide now. All right. So somehow somebody has got to be responsible. But these are some of the other examples of what we believe are non-negligent errors. So if we're on a project, we're going to need a set of data to rely on. Or else clients are going to spend hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars, for an engineer to redo work. So it is appropriate in projects to provide an engineer with information. Now it's also appropriate for the engineer not to just blindly rely on it. There's a standard of care that goes along with the right to rely. It's not just these documents and these things are assumed to be accurate. There should be at least some level of reading, making sure that this makes sense, that they're asked questions, because later on, if it proves to be wrong, we'll need to be able to show that it was reasonable for us to rely on it. And that's why you'll see when we write scopes of work, $100,000 is like 20 pages, that there's assumptions that are written in the scope and there should be limitations. I don't know if you've been to a doctor, and sorry to get graphic. It's 8:51. So I had to go to get a C-section, and then I was given this written summary of all the things that is like the medical version of informed consent. There's discussion about what the procedure was, in this case, delivering a baby out of a hole that does not exist, what would be involved, cutting me open, taking out my organs and child, and then putting my organs back, and then what the risks are, bleeding, infections, blood clots, and organ injuries. And then there was acknowledgement by me, the patient, to acknowledge all of those risks, of course, which I signed and thanked them. And those same steps are very important in establishing the standard of care for our engineering projects as well. What we recommend is that we document things, not just from a standpoint of CYA, but just because, memories fade, especially my mom brain, and you want to support good decision making. We and our firm now have adopted a program where we use a decision-making log. So if you're going to write something down, use a decision-making log so that we understand that even internally, when we do we also understand when we do our qualitative reviews, what decisions were made and why. Because something happens 3 years ago and you try to find why, and two things happen. One, the people that made the decision, they might not be around. Or two, you try to ascertain the basis of the decision, and that's very, very difficult. But the medical field has seemed to make that pretty much a standard. Us engineers, not so much. So engineers should use the equivalent of medical informed consent for the benefit of clients, because then clients can be part of the process. Not from a standpoint of assuming responsibility, but because there are decisions that are made and that clients have a limited budget. And that's necessary that they at least get informed of their options. Right now, I'm facing a lose-lose situation on one of my projects, but the most important thing is going to be the communication of what it means not only to the agency, but the people that that agency serves. And then when we talk about site conditions, We can investigate a lot of site conditions and literally spend millions of dollars. We can do 100 borings, do unlimited topo and measurements of all these types of things. But then we have to look at what's feasible and what are feasible assumptions to make about how much is enough when you're looking at sites and underground conditions. And you can spend a lot of money up front, or you can wait for the project to go into construction and some unforeseen conditions arise. And if they arise, there should be compensation given because that's what we decided. And also, what is normal? What is a normal investigation? That's always going to depend on the project. So that's why the word normal is dangerous. What is that? And once you assume that your project is just like every other project, you're probably in trouble. Next slide. Showing off my millennial capabilities here. This list can go on forever. These are just representative. We can see on this projects, clients, people change. I had this project I'm working on now. We have a different client manager, and he has a much different view of what the project means. And he came in at the 11th hour, so we had to redo everything. And it wasn't like it was negligent of KJ. It was just a different philosophy, a different approach, and different objectives, and we need to adapt. To understand the goals and meet these expectations, and also communicate upfront that this may result in a change of scope. Now, we're still able to do it within the project budget, but the most important thing that there was communication and adequate time for review. But when client personnel changes, it's very important that you have a meeting to go back over the project objectives. It's almost like you redo the workshop or redo the talk that Jerry will talk about later. And go back to that beginning so everyone's on the same page.
I think that I think the other things are self-explanatory if you don't need to go through them. But I do know that, building code officials is like the golden rule. The bank's got the gold, they make the rules. There are different interpretations. I would say some of them are quite enlightening from what we as engineers interpret it, but they're the building officials. So that's not necessarily negligence on the part of the engineer. There are things that are going to happen. Everything that Alicia said is true about projects being unique and evolving. And there's standards and things that change that we don't have control over. And that's something that has to be factored in. And this is the number one, really, the misinterpretation of design documents. If you're doing in the construction phase and you don't have the designer issuing opinions on the design intent and someone else is doing that, that's going to be an issue. That's for sure. Alicia?
Thanks. I think I'm turning back to you.
Cool. So, well, Alicia, why don't you do the moat thing? Because you're great at
my moat thing? I don't know if they can see it. So
yeah, I know.
This says, suddenly a heated exchange took place between the king and the moat contractor.
Yeah,
Jerry tested this out.
That? Yeah.
You can ask your friend next to you if you're not laughing about it.
Yeah. I don't think the moat was supposed to be inside the wall. That was my learned opinion as a non-engineer. But again, you can't make some of this stuff up. But I think the point that we're trying to make here, and we lost the screen, or I lost the screen, but that never stops me from talking, Alicia, is what is the right standard for engineers? Remember I said it's a professional service, and I'll admit you back in, Alicia. And why isn't perfection the appropriate standard for engineers? Well, it's what is the standard that is in place? It's did the professional exercise reasonable professional care and skill under the circumstances at the time that the services were rendered. So clients often want to know why design professionals can't guarantee perfect performance. Well, it's simple. Professional services are just that. They're professional services. They're not commodities or goods. You're not making widgets. A doctor or lawyer can't guarantee a result, and the law does treat goods and services differently. So let's look at that in the next slide and talk about why that's the case. Next slide. Again, if you're looking at goods, manufacturing items, think of it that way. Professional services are much different from that. it requires the use of professional skill and judgment. And as Alicia pointed out, it's always tailored to the client's and the agency's specific situation or problem. Every problem is different. You're expected that the engineer will look at that using their background, their knowledge, their training experience, and recommend a solution that's appropriate. Now, that does factor in to the budget's schedule and site, but just remember, what's above all that is the standard of care. So if you only give me a budget for $1,000 and I'm silly enough to accept that budget, the standard of care won't let me off the hook if I design a solution that doesn't meet the professional quality that's expected from other engineers rendering those services at the time and place those services are rendered. So that's something that, as an engineer, if you're going to make a business decision to accept a project where the budget is not proper and your scope is still broad, you still have to meet the standard of care. And obviously that's something for you to think about. Now, why are engineering projects different? To engineer is human. It's really the application of professional skill and judgment. Every project is different. Remember, if you ever look at manufacturer rates, and usually you're looking at a 99.9% standard that from a quality assurance. It's meant to be that high because, again, you have a very detailed specification that it's designed and constructed repeatedly until you almost achieve perfection. Not the case with our projects. And certainly we know there's challenges and we design a solution, but you're not guaranteeing it. All you're guaranteeing, if you want to call it a guarantee, is that you're going to apply the skill and judgment that another professional qualified to perform those services would deliver on that project. The outcome, many cases, is beyond the control of the engineer, but the application of professional skill and judgment is never outside the control of the engineer, and engineers always accept responsibility for their skill and judgment being applied to a project. But recognize there are things that are outside of our control. Next slide. Yeah, I'm a person that I always laugh at certain things, and I like to look at the words. And there's a generic terms about errors and omissions insurance, and I look at many of the things are self-inflicted. If we would call it by its proper name, which is professional liability insurance, we wouldn't have to have this discussion about why all errors and omissions are not negligence. But I can understand from a client perspective. You have a contract that talks about errors or omissions insurance. The truth of the matter is, and I love my fellow lawyers, but remember, my job is to protect Alicia from other members of my own profession. And lawyers who write errors or omission insurance into contracts and thinking that they're protecting their client really are doing their clients a disservice, because that's not what it really is. It's professional liability insurance. Remember, I started out my career, may not have been reflected in that detailed bio, working for a client. I spent the first 7 years working for the County of Westchester in New York, working in their Public Works Bureau as counsel for them. And it was a great learning experience for me, because I see everything from the client's experience. That was my background and training. And I got hired by my first engineering firm, even though Westchester County sued them. But I understood what made the county sue them, and it had nothing to do with them not exercising the appropriate standard of care. But the county just thought, well, it was my project. I hired the contractor, I hired the engineer, and I hired a bunch of people. So it has to be their fault, and I'll just sue them all, and then I'll figure out who did it later. Maybe not the best way to conduct yourselves, but when you write contracts and you put words that are not really reflective of responsibility, you cause that misexpectation to be generated from the beginning. And errors or omissions insurance, it really should be called professional liability insurance. Why is that? Next slide. Well, it doesn't cover all errors and omissions. It's just that simple. I mean, it may sound self-evident, but by using this terminology, you can understand why it's not the client's fault to have expectations that are not in accordance with what really can be delivered on a project. And that's really the basis for this talk, not to go through the weeds of contracts, but just to understand what it is that we're responsible for from a professional standpoint and why we have professional liability insurance. It's to protect our firm, and it's also to protect you indirectly. So if something goes wrong on a project, you're not going to come in and steal Alicia's desk as a means of recovery. You want a policy that's going to pay out money, and that's what professional liability is. It's there as a backstop. If an engineer doesn't meet the standard of care, and that's the way the policies are written, you have professional liability insurance as a measure for you to protect yourself, your agency, and the public, that you're going to get the benefit of your bargain and you're not going to have to pay twice for a service that should have been rendered properly from the beginning. So it's interesting. Every professional liability insurance policy has an exclusion for liability assumed by contract, which is kind of interesting when you think about it. But what that really means is that they'll cover the liability that they otherwise would have covered without the contractual provision. So all those quote unquote uninsurable warranties and guarantees, guess what? We're an employee-owned firm. Our policy, and we have extensive professional liability insurance because we want to protect folks like Alicia and her children in the future. So there is a firm there. We have professional liability insurance. The carrier's perspective is that, look, this isn't a policy that's designed to pay out on everything. We won't be in business. It is triggered by the failure to meet the standard of care. So if you have contract provisions which all surround indemnity clauses that are based on negligence, there's contract clauses that state what the standard of care is. All those things are things that we would be liable for anyway, even if it wasn't stated in the contract. So we'll cover those things, but we're not going to cover standards that say we're going to perform according to the highest standards, all those types of things. Engineer, if you're willing to sign that contract, that's going to have to come out of your pocket. And clients, if you're trying to recover in a situation like that, it's going to be very difficult to recover for those damages that are not insured. But most clients, I think, know that it's important to require professional liability insurance. And then so the next slide will kind of go what I hear a lot, and Alicia may hear a lot from clients saying, okay, so I got professional liability insurance. Well, obviously you're covered. If it's not covered, your coverage must be deficient. Why don't you buy better coverage then? And then the second response, in each slide I'll go through some details because these were my top 3 list. I don't care if it isn't covered. And there are some clients like that. I get it, because there are some things, for example, like I'm never going to object to a client that says that if you intentionally harm somebody, and perform a criminal act, I don't care whether it's covered or not. You need to accept responsibility. Well, we accept responsibility because Alicia's not known to be committing criminal acts, so far as I know. And I don't think her future would be bright as an engineer if she did that. So I'm willing to take on that responsibility as a professional engineering firm. But clients will have that response. I don't care if it isn't covered. Then the one that is my favorite is everybody else signs this contract. So let's take a couple minutes and kind of go into that in a little bit deeper detail. Is I would be, as the chief risk officer of Kennedy Jenks, it would be my interest. The only reason why I have a job is to protect Alicia and her children so they have a future. If I could buy better coverage, that's my job, is to make sure that we're well insured, because we want to continue to be here for another 100 years. That's the history of our firm, 100 years in this business. That is an awesome responsibility that Alicia willingly assumes. And I'm sat here listening to her talk, and I said, you know what? She did learn how to fish. I tell everyone, I teach people how to fish so they don't go to their lawyer for advice. They need to understand the why it's important and why we need to have these kinds of conversations with clients where you explain in plain English the why. And why don't I buy better coverage? If there's better coverage out there, we're going to find it. And most engineering firms are like Kennedy Jenks. There's the concept, and Alicia hears me say this all the time, there's enlightened self-interest. I have every reason to want to have as complete coverage as possible. Why? Because I want my kids to have a future. I want Alicia's kids to have a future. And you can't have a future if you don't have insurance that protects it. Now, understand, no project is perfect. I think we got that through your heads by now, as to the why. And insurance isn't written for sure things. You can't find a policy. There's always a contingency for insurance. You can't insure the burning building. That's the phrase that you also hear. You know, it's for a fortuitous loss, and it's obviously it doesn't cover everything. So you want to make sure that when you write the contracts, it aligns with not only the expectations, which we've talked about by now, which should be to meet the professional standard of care, but also to meet what's in the contract. And so everyone at the end of the day, if the God forbid happens, then you do have a policy to recover on and you're protected. Next slide. I don't care if it isn't covered. Well, I kind of laugh about that. Then why'd you write the 3 pages of insurance requirements? And apologies to the clients in the room who may have exhibits that go on for pages and pages. You obviously have a good broker that's selling a lot of insurance, but the insurance does cover a lot of things. And why do you have the insurance requirements if the contract doesn't align to go with the coverage provided the insurance? It doesn't make sense to me. I'm just a simple person and say it makes sense that you would want to have, if you're going through all the trouble and you do an excellent job, and most of the contracts see making sure that there's coverage for workers' comp, auto, excess liability, cyber in some instances, pollution liability, professional liability, all those types of things should line up to what's in the contract. And at the end of the day, I don't care if it's covered. What you really want is to give the public and your constituency security that if something goes wrong, you're going to be able to collect on it. When you have something that's just a piece of paper, it's like what I tell engineers, that's great that you write that 20-year warranty, that guarantee for the manufacturer. But how many manufacturers today do you know that are still around 20 years from now? And if it's just a piece of paper and there isn't a bond or something that's going to back it up, where's the financial security? Because in a way, that's illusory. You think you're protected, but when the God forbid happens, if there isn't insurance or some security behind it, the client really isn't going to have the access to those proceeds. So professional liability insurance is in the interest of everyone because it does provide insurance and a certainty that you can get the benefit of your project in terms of the financial benefit. You're not paying twice to get the project that you should have had delivered originally. Next slide. This is my all-time favorite. Someone else will sign a contract if you don't. And that is absolutely true. But my attitude at that is that that firm is willing to sign a piece of paper and put their firm at risk. Do you really want that firm performing your project? I mean, that to me, as a client, I understood that. And it was kind of funny because I wrote contract provisions that I routinely changed. And those were the firms that we went with because those are the firms that paid attention to the details. If I have an engineer that's not reading the contract, how do I know the engineer's not reading the specification the same way and just signing anything? I just submit that may not be the best way of vetting engineers. And again, if the push for revenue was too great, and we fight that battle every day in our firm. We need revenue because we want to support Alicia and her family. That's important. But if we take on too many contracts and the contracts are not reasonable, we will be putting the assets of the firm at risk, meaning our 100-year future may go down the drain. So it's something to think about. Those firms that are signing anything, at the end of the day, they're really betting on that they won't get a claim. And if all of a sudden it happens, they're going to be out of business. And we've seen that in the industry with firms not being around. There's very few firms that are around 10 years ago that are around today. And that's why you see all the mergers and acquisitions by the big box firms. It's a different world, that's for sure. But again, it's a choice. Now, let's talk a little bit more about engineers. And Alicia knows that every time I see us write ourselves the word insure, I kind of freak out, have a little bit of a panic attack and twitch. And we're not insurers. We have professional liability insurance, but you can see that even has limits. So let's talk a little bit more about why it's unreasonable from an expectation for you to have the engineers on your project footing the bill with everything that goes wrong. Well, I think the number one violation of it is indemnity clauses that are kind of they protect you against everything and everything. It's a nice concept. As a lawyer, we think we're protecting our clients. I've seen a lot of really great clients come out of contracts come out of Hawaii because I think there's a real understanding of the indemnity responsibilities. And when you write defense obligations that go beyond insurance, what you're really doing is making it very difficult for insurance to come in and step up when there's a claim that happens. So my feedback to you all, and it's probably a joint effort by both the engineering community, the professional societies, and clients, that there seems to be much more of a realistic approach to indemnity than there are in the States. And I can tell you it's much different than in California, where our headquarters are. It's a wild, I call it the Wild West out there. And clients think that just because they can put it in there, they should put it in there. But at the end of the day, if you're not really protected, you're asking for things that really won't happen. Clients can't be named as additional insured. Professional liability insurance will be there for Kennedy Jenks in the unlikely event we commit malpractice, and that will fund the client's damages. So that's something to think about. Next slide. So here's the thing. I understand the pressures. I've served as a commissioner in Westchester County Public Utility Agency. It wasn't a conflict what I did for Kennedy Jenks. So I've been a public official for many years. I understand the pressures that are placed on public officials to deliver projects. And if something goes wrong, the agency itself, that even though they're the sponsor of the project, they're going to require it be fixed. And in some cases, there's a lot of finger pointing that goes on. And I understand that at the end of the day, it's all about client relationships, and engineers, we don't have clients if we're in disputes with clients. We've got to work together to figure out how to fix the problem. What my firm always takes the position with clients, let's solve the problem. And we routinely will sign agreements called standstill agreements, where if there's, not that we routinely make negligent mistakes, but if there's this question on our performance, we'll stand behind our work, say, let's work on the solution. You don't have to have your lawyers involved. We can put a document together that says, hey, it's a standstill. You reserve your rights. We reserve our rights. Stop the finger pointing. Let's solve the problem. Because obviously it's going to require some degree of investigation. And if we immediately start with a letter writing campaign, pointing fingers and fixing blames, we're never going to get to the solution. And it's always easier, we found, to figure out how to apportion responsibility when the problem's solved. So when that water main breaks, you should be focusing on making sure you get it back up and running and services restored. We could do the forensics on what happened, why, at a more reasonable time period where we have the ability to look at it professionally and we don't jump to rash positions that are hard to back off on. And I understand that, having worked on both sides of the fence, both as a client, a public official, and now working in the consulting industry for more than 30 years. Next slide. If it advances, that would be good. Oh, so where did all these expectations come from? I don't really think the answers are going to surprise you. I think the collection is taken as a compendium. And Alicia, if you were supposed to jump in,
I think so.
me, I think you should be jumping in. She's learned to
I was
deal
like,
with my
where's my
New York speech. I'll just
All
keep
right.
talking. She learns.
Oh gosh, I need to change the slide. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Where do they come from?
Yep. Where?
Oh, so it's always not my fault, obviously. It's always, but someone has to be at fault. And anything that happens, someone has to be blamed, someone has to be held responsible. And oftentimes the first question out of someone's mouth is, whose fault is it? That happens in my house. So it's not what happened, why it happened, what are we going to do to fix it? It's whose fault is it? But we should take a step back and figure out how to solve the problem. And we'll make sure that we take corrective action, apply our lessons learned to move forward. Many clients in charge of agencies before they were they were professionals themselves, so they really understood how design and construction went. But now there's just a shortage of professionals in general, and there might be someone in charge that's well-intended, but not as familiar with the design and construction process as others. And so not to disrespect anyone that's not a design professional, because like Jerry, there's lots of people in these types of roles that got their education on the job and they are very familiar with the construction process. And they have a deep understanding of all the parties. But when you don't have that, it's easy to have a lot of misunderstandings. And that's why Jerry has been doing a lot of this type of education for ACEC, is to make people more aware of that disconnect. And it helps from an education and awareness standpoint with responsibility. So we don't always get to work with Jerry. Fortunately, I do, with 30 years of experience asking questions that us engineers think that we know the answer to until he asks us more questions. But, you know, let's face it, there's always, the last thing is there's always limited, money is a problem. Super common nowadays, the initial estimate that we give is $20 million. And then it becomes $30 million. And then today, it's $60 million. And, you know, this evolved over 1 year of a budget. And how are our agencies going to meet the needs of the public? And it's on us. Sometimes when we tell the client what they want to hear, we put ourselves at risk. You know, clients have limited budgets and they are faced with a difficult problem that we need to work together to solve.
Yeah, and before you go to the next slide, this is a concept that I've been trying out with clients. It's really, if you accept the premise that there's no perfect project and that everything is not going to go according to plan, because my life is the best example of that. My plan and what's happened, like my friend Mike Tyson said, our plan's great until you get punched in the face. I just seem to always get punched in the face. So if you don't have a project that has a fair amount of contingency in there, remember, you don't have new money to work from. And that's a real problem, because if you don't have in the project itself, I don't care if you don't want to tell us about it because you're afraid that somehow that you're letting out a secret, but for yourselves, understand nothing goes the way it's supposed to go, and you need to have that contingency in there, because it's hard to get new money, especially if you stood up for a council or you're working with a budget and all that. You don't have to necessarily tell me what it is, but as you're planning it, make sure you build that in. That contingency is really important, because you're not working with new money, and it's very hard to get new money. So Alicia, just tell the other component, because it's not the client's fault. What about us, Alicia?
I don't know who this is. Some of you might know who this is. I'm gonna just keep going.
1971 Pogo. I have, Alicia keeps telling me I have to update my references. Google it.
I know who Snoopy is.
Yes, we'll go back to Snoopy in the future. So we've met the enemy. Talk about it, Alicia.
So besides clients, you know, us engineers ourselves, and how we portray our services can also be the enemy. So that's why Jerry is not allowed to look at our SOQs, and it's better I just hide from him. So this is the way that we can describe ourselves. And from a client's perspective, clients should rightfully be able to hold us to this standard. Key parts of our proposal, there's all these representation of warranties and guarantees that they didn't write. We wrote it into our proposal. We wrote them. And so, you know, if you're going to write it, just make sure that you can comply with it and you mean it. And that doesn't mean that you need to write 14 pages of disclaimers. You just need to be able to be held accountable for what you're saying.
And again, that gets to the expectation. I mean, the clients may rightfully have an expectation, and it comes from the engineer. So just remember that as you're making all these promises, we just want people to be able to, what we always say, we deliver on our promises and we will be held accountable. So if Alicia's going to do that, it's knowing and intentional, and it shouldn't be what's known as legal puffery.
And so what it's written, how it's written, it will be interpreted as a higher standard of care, and that's not covered by insurance, because insurance covers the standard of care. You know, look at it from a third-party perspective that will be reading that proposal, and they're going to interpret it as the words that they're written, not how we meant to say it. And, not just to win the job. We can't just say, oh, we wrote it because we wanted to win the job and it sounded really good when we did it. And that's our slogan. Just be careful. And engineers, we should be responsible for the things that we write.
Next slide.
Sorry.
You can take
Sorry.
this one, Alicia. It's this didn't come from one of our proposals, thankfully, but someone else's actually.
Sorry, I'm trying to find my thing. Can't remember what I was going to say.
All right, well,
Oh,
I'll fill in
thanks.
on this one. Again, I think what we find is that we all become victims to what we hear in the marketplace, and sustainability is the term of the day. Maybe it's not as in vogue as it was a few years ago, but everything was sustainable, and everything that was sustainable was going to reduce your costs. And when that's reflected in proposals, when that's reflected in marketing documents, that creates that expectation. And that's what I call the unintentional warranty. Really, even if it's not properly operated and maintained, even if you don't control energy, making those types of things that really sound good. And that's why I'm challenging this whole collaborative delivery model. Not that I don't think it's a better way, but be careful about what you're promising in this. Every flavor of the month comes out and makes these promises, but at the end of the day, you're going to hear what I'm going to be advocating. It's much more awareness, much more education sessions like this, but understand what you're creating. You're creating this expectation, and can you really fulfill it? And is it really reasonable for you to make that claim? It may sound good, but is it something that you can really back up? Next slide. And
Okay,
that's
now I
leads
found
into the marketing. So that's why you keep me away from the marketing group.
So, we've got this point by now. Using ensure, highest, best, expert will be held to those exceeding expectations. And we're not saying that you shouldn't say it, just make sure that you can deliver on those expectations. So Jerry's advice to me this year with writing my performance goal was to set them really low, because then you can exceed them. Under promise and over deliver. Obviously, we're kidding, but just remember that when you're writing things that are aspirational, and then when you're writing things that are you're going to be held accountable for, that you make sure that you understand the difference between the two, and that you're careful, and not just from trying to CYA, but from a standpoint that the client's reading this, and the client should have their expectations met, and we're setting the expectations by writing the words that we write. So pay attention to what you write, and that's all I got, and I will turn it back. Jerry's favorite part is doing the talk, because I haven't done it yet, so he gets to do the talk.
Yeah, and I've got 5 kids, so I've had lots of experience with doing the talk. And those of you who have kids know about the time when you have to talk about your kids about the fact of life. So, me, I'm trying to make an impression. Hopefully it's one that you'll have some takeaways and give you some things to think about. But I think that, if you want to, and Alicia's fond of hearing me say this, begin with the end in mind, you should make sure that on every one of your projects, and a lot of times it can't happen before the contract is signed. Usually the very first thing that you should do in your project, whether you call it a workshop, whether you call it a meeting, and it doesn't matter what size project, because it could be a Teams meeting. It's always better when it's in person. You have the key people on the project who are responsible for it ultimately, because whoever's going to be accountable in the client's organization, they should be there at the very beginning. So the engineer and the project manager who's leading it, everyone can have an understanding of what the expectations are on it. And that's what I call the talk. The talk is really where we talk about, we've got the contract, we've got the goals, we've got the scope. Let's revisit what are the key goals and what are the things that we're going to do to make sure that they happen. And to me, it's all about collaboration. But if you don't have, we are so fond today of emails, putting things in chat messages. We've lost sight of what it means to talk one human being to another. If it can't be in person, virtually, take the time, have that talk at the beginning of the project, and repeat that talk, because as a parent, I had to repeat that talk multiple times throughout my kids' development, when it first was necessary, and then reinforcing it over the years. And now my kids, thankfully, are all over 30. And I'm still having the talk with them about different things that's going on in their life. And I don't do it by email. I don't do it by text messaging. I don't try and do it in the context of something else. But let's look at that in terms of skipping it. Yes, we can save time, but in the long run, the outcome is never good. So that's what I always call the talk. Next slide. What are the elements that go into that? How do we create this paradigm that is really people working together? Kind of what that story I told at the beginning, the Friday afternoons eating Arthur Avenue lunch. And those of you from the Bronx will know what I'm talking about at the construction site. How do we move away from that cookie cutter product paradigm to saying this is a unique project, will have special challenges, goals, and here's how we can work together to achieve them. That's truly collaboration. Next slide. What are the elements? This is not rocket science, but I have to remind people about it all the time. That's why I think it's very funny, this new movement towards collaborative delivery as opposed to what we were doing before. Obviously, the tide has shifted in terms of the adversarial nature that we all come to projects trained. As lawyers, it's ridiculous that alternative dispute resolution is talking about negotiation and resolving matters by mediation or by the parties. That somehow this world has become backwards, that's alternative dispute resolution, and litigation is the conventional means. You got to stop and think about what we're doing and why. These are the elements. Put the contracts aside. Here I am. I spent 30 years writing contracts, drafting contracts, having Alicia read these wonderful things about how expert I am in this. But let me tell you something. A great contract is not going to substitute for a project where you have true teamwork, all these elements here. You can't write that into a contract and enforce it. That's why you got to have the talk. You got to have relationships on every project. And if you don't spend time intentionally thinking about it and planning it, the contract terms are not going to save you. The contract terms are the last resort for people. And that's usually when you have people in my profession making a lot of money off of your project, because the average hourly rate for lawyers in America, construction lawyers, is over $500 an hour. And one lawyer can never handle a matter. There's got to be two lawyers backing him or her up. Think about these principles. Think about how you can apply them to your projects when we're talking about achieving success, setting expectations, and meeting the standard of care. These will be the key. They're not new. It's just we need reminders of how important they are. Next slide. Again, I think this is kind of a summary of what we're talking about. We'll be happy to provide you with a copy. Just talk with Alicia about our decision log, decision-making log, whatever they call it now. But we had to, as a firm, make sure we had a system so our folks, as key project decisions are being made, we can record them. And so it's not from a CYA, it's so people can have an understanding of how do we make this decision? Because I'm often asking later on, like, why did we do this? And I get a lot of like, well, read 14 emails and if you could piece it together, good luck. So it is a collaborative process. It shouldn't be just passing the baton off, making sure that we understand the roles and responsibilities. This is kind of a summary slide. Clarify who best controls the risk. We'll be happy to share with you our project risk register that we are now mandating for use on every project so that we can be sure that we have the talk with the client, that the client understands the risks, that there's a full, that what Alicia's talking about when she went in for the C-section, boy, there was a big discussion of the risks and the assumption of the risks. And that was part of a system. So we've learned that we need to have the two most important things is those decision-making logs and the risk register, because key project decisions you need to understand. It forces people to think about those decisions. And the risk register, again, before it happens, you're able to think about who's going to manage it. Address upfront the accountability misconceptions. I've beaten a dead horse on that one, hopefully by now. But again, this is the takeaway. What we're doing, is exercising professional skill and judgment. It's a specific response to your specific needs, your goals, and it's under a unique set of circumstances. So what Alicia said was so right. If we start treating this as quote unquote normal, and we start adopting this approach on every project, we will fail. We will not meet your expectations, and we will not meet your standard of care. And the standard of care is evolving. AI will affect our standard of care. Not replace human judgment and skill, but it will affect the standard of care because we'll be able to use tools that make us more effective and hopefully achieve better results. That example of the fire retardant plywood, asbestos, years ago that was standard, but it's always going to evolve. That's the takeaway as we're going to go to the next slide for both engineers, clients. There's some things that we should be doing so that they become part of the system to set these reasonable and appropriate expectations. So the final slides will talk about what I think we need to do together, both on the project, within the office, and in the community so that these goals will be achieved. First and foremost, on every project, if you don't have collaboration as a goal, your number one goal, you're not going to ever have a successful project. And I sit on this review board where I see things from the very get-go. The project was destined for failure. There was never a formal attempt. They even had partnering sessions, but they were partnering sessions that were attended, and people go back in the office and start letter writing campaigns. And I'm sitting there as a dispute review board reading this saying, really? That you're writing letters about this? And how long did it take you to write the letter when you could have just had a meeting and talked with people about it? So it's much important that you establish it as a goal, that if you're an engineer and you don't see your role as being the trusted advisor, you should really rethink your role, because you should be the person that gains the trust of the client, not because you took them to lunch or dinner or whatever, because you delivered service and you showed that their project was your most important project, that you're not afraid to have the talk. It's uncomfortable. It's not fun, but if you skip it, you're going to have issues later on. And I've learned that as a parent. If you don't have a discussion, you don't document the project expectations at the beginning, and that's where the decision log comes into this, and you don't speak up, we have in our firm what we call a culture of politeness. You can be professional, but you need to voice your concerns early on. And if you don't do that, the client really is just not performing the client a service. Don't tell people what they want to hear. It's not fun. Tell them and make it professional, but make sure that they have a full understanding. If that schedule is unrealistic, explain to them reasonably why that schedule is so challenging and unrealistic. And then maybe you may not be able to do anything about it, but at least you had that expectation. And you're going to say, that design will not come up within the normal standard of care. There's just not enough time to get it done. And understand, we're going to be fixing it during construction with change orders and RFIs. That contingency, that's the number one takeaway that I've seen. When you have projects that don't have an adequate contingency in there, you're not going to allow people the flexibility to come to when something goes wrong that you can fix it without having a dispute. Change orders are not necessarily, let me go through that quickly. Back slide. Not necessarily design defects. The design win budget we talked about, the expectation inflation, try and do your best to that. This delivering bad news appropriately and promptly, very important. When you withhold information, that does not breed trust. You come up with a team approach and you deliver it, but you also think about solutions and don't walk away from it. Belly up to the bar, accept it, and let's come up with a plan to deal with it. Next slide. Obviously, this can occur, and this is probably more so on the engineer, but also with the client. People need to understand, the first slide was really talking about what the engineer's responsibilities are, and we do a good job, I think, in our firm with making sure people understand it. The hardest thing is getting them to exercise those responsibilities, because people want to have good client relationships and find it tough to have conversations. So we actually had to implement a program in our firm called Difficult Conversations, training people how to have difficult conversations, because not everybody's like me and grew up having difficult conversations every day. And that's probably why I became a lawyer. I was the youngest of 4 boys. difficult conversation was how I didn't get my butt kicked by my older brothers. I had to figure out a way how to be an effective negotiator and stay alive. But I think that that's recognizing that doesn't come easy to some people, that you create an environment where people can learn how to have these conversations, and then they don't become so difficult. Creating a project where people of both parties are satisfied, I think that goes without saying, but you just can't lose sight of it. Understanding what's the most important thing to the client, that is key, because there's a lot of trade-offs and you can't have everything. And clients need to understand that, and there's got to be priorities. The risk register helps with that. The effective communications and documentations, you have to draw the line between over documenting, but making sure key decisions are documented. That's where the decision log is. Construction phase issues, delaying on a construction project costs everybody time, money, and hurts the project. So you got to really identify those issues and get the right team. And more importantly, there are always early warning signs. Don't ignore them. When you ignore them, I say you're going to leave that to a different day. It doesn't get better with time. It never gets better with time. Next slide, and I think it's our last one. I think that this is the last slide because it's why I'm here, and I'm not there in person, but why I'm so committed at this point in my career to saying, can we talk about doing this in a different way besides hiding behind lawyers and hiding behind contracts? Can we be upfront with our project goals, and can we have a conversation? Can we have the talk and have the talk repeatedly and get that part of our project scopes? They're the most valuable aspects, to listen, ask questions, have roundtables, and have this be a dialogue in our professional community that people understand this is what we do. We're engineers and we're project managers and we're client public officials in some cases, but also stewards of the public trust. And we need to talk with each other so we can gain projects that not only get acceptance, but we're proud of. And all of this requires that we take an approach where in our firm, we regularly share lessons learned. We have folks talk about their projects, not only the successes that the marketing group sends out, but we also regularly have technical learning sessions where we share the lessons learned. That's how we all get better. Leisha, I don't know if you got any final comments, but I think we're through, and I don't know if we have any time for questions.
Okay, folks, so we do have the opportunity to ask Jerry and Alicia any questions you guys might have. So I'll be the mic runner if anybody has any questions. Okay, Shannon, you were first, but he's closer, so I'll be there in a second.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts you could share on the standard of care in the context of a design build project. So what I've seen is a lot of times there's an issue that in a design bid build, we'd pay the contractor and we wouldn't bother the engineer about. But in a design build, because we're on the same team, clients tend to have a higher expectation that, because it can sometimes feel like the DB team is trying to make a claim on an error that they made themselves. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on that. And part of that is what happened in the promise. How design build is being marketed and sold. It's going to get the project done faster, cheaper, and better. And that's a myth. So the standard of care is actually, we in those contracts, we talk about the standard of care for professionals, but we also understand that when you're involved in a design build project, that the client, and I'm on a dispute review board for a design build project in New York, where Kenny Jenks has a practice. And it's very interesting because the owner is still thinking that he or she has control of the project. But in the design build, just think of a design build project it's like a big performance spec project. You're not being very prescriptive. So there's an owner expectation that I'm going to be completely satisfied. The contractor and engineer are saying, well, wait a second. We just said we deliver this plant that's going to meet these requirements. We're making it there. And if you're looking for something else, then we're going to have a claim. And similarly, the design build specifications are not that detailed. So I think that comes down to why progressive design build and why other forms of delivery like CMGC, construction manager, general contractor, are now taking place, because the fixed price design build, where the contractor bid a price and the owner thought that they were going to get the project for that price, probably have more claims than conventional projects, because the expectations are not aligned. And the contractor is going to look to see, hey, if these costs and everything went up, I should get compensated. But let me tell you something, because I'm leading a workshop on May 1st and 2nd about that problem, and I'm leading it for ASCE. The number one thing that we're going to be talking about on these projects are the expectations of the clients. And the engineer has really two clients. The engineer has the ultimate client that we're used to working for, if it's public client, that wants their expectations met, and they're used to the engineer focusing as a trusted advisor. Well, engineer isn't on the owner's side now. The engineer is with the contractor. So the engineer has a responsibility to the project, but their direct contractual responsibilities to the contractor. And then the engineer has another area of risk to the subcontractors. So engineers who work as a sub on a design build project, it's I think something for the industry that we're looking at. So there is a different standard of care. The contracts will help, I think, make it clearer, but also at the end of the day, the owner's expectation will be different and has to be different. And it's not going to be the prescriptive project that you get in design bid build. So great conversation, because unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it is the fastest growing part of our project delivery, design build. And I think that's why folks are looking at progressive design build, where they can work together as a team up to a certain level of comfort where the owner believes, okay, now the project is designed enough that I can be assured I'm going to get what I want. And now I'm turning it over to the design build team. But it is certainly not, whenever I see the claims at DBIA and others about how those projects are going to reduce costs and claims, I sit there and say, we're doing it again to ourselves. We're creating an expectation that history is not showing to be the case. But we got a two-day workshop for owners and contractors and engineers to talk about the realities of doing design build.
Alicia helped me out there, Charles. So
I was trying to keep the mic away from Shannon, Alicia.
Well, we'll make this a quick question, and you touched on this a little bit, but I'd love for you to share your thoughts on how we can approach provisions that require the engineer to do a redesign when the construction bid prices come in above what our estimated budget is.
Well, here's the thing. If you use, and I'm a big proponent of the Engineers Joint Contract Documents Committee, which owners sit on, you should be rendering your opinion of probable construction cost. And when you write those contract clauses, if there aren't provisions that reflect reality, where there's going to be things outside your control, can anyone control the tariffs? Can anyone control what's happening, the instability in the market these days? And it's almost impossible to sign a contract that's going to guarantee that you're going to be within a certain percentage, unless you make that percentage really, really large. In this market, it's anybody's guess, and it's difficult. That's where the talk comes in place. That's where these forums like this are great, to talk about how do we deal in this environment with the uncertainties of the marketplace and bidding. And the owner does need to know a budget. There needs to be a reasonable budget, and the engineer, we have now brought in experience with people with estimating. So from a standard of care, we're doing as good a job as we think we can do, but there's always going to be the caveats. And when you sign a contract that says you're guaranteeing that you're not going to exceed the budget and you're going to do it at your cost, you're going to be held accountable for that.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Nope.
You can, we put our contact information. You feel free to email Alicia or I. We want to keep the conversation going. If there's
I think
specific
there's one more.
topics.
Yeah, Jerry, sorry, we have one here.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Very good talk. And I'm actually a client, an agency. So
Good.
From an agency perspective, is it within the standard care when the the estimate starts, when the engineer of record becomes aware that the project estimate is actually going haywire. And is it within the standard of care for the engineer to actually notify the client, alert the client that this is a problem before the client puts it out to bid?
You could probably quote 4 parts of my slide where I say that's absolutely our responsibility. When you have knowledge of something and you are aware that it affects what's published, and again, get back to you have to talk with the client. You know that you have a certain budget and there's things that are outside your control. That's why I was talking about having those difficult conversations. You should do due diligence, right? Because I was taught in this industry, never bring a problem to a client without having a proposed solution. But what was that last slide? Don't delay giving the client bad news, because you do that, you're not in the client's shoes. You're taking away the client the ability to make decisions on it. So it is an obligation. The question is, what's a reasonable time period? I think a reasonable time period gives you enough time to make sure you understand the why, and you're not going to necessarily have a solution, but the client can't find out 6 months later.
Jerry, this is Charles. I have a question, maybe a follow up on that was Ernie Lau that asked that question. He's the manager in chief of our local board of water supply. I think the concept of standard of care is something that it's easy to understand, but from maybe not just our agencies, but I was thinking about this as a prime consultant, me as a prime with my expectation of subs. How do you find what is defined as that standard? How do we help the agencies and other people understand what is that measure? Because I think the concept is easy, but same question that Ernie had.
It's a great question. I mean, we had this program at KJ, and Alicia was part of it and still is part of it, called Compass. And it's all about how do we assure that we're meeting the standard of care. And the way we do that is through our quality program. And we actually just are revisiting it, where we ended up putting it in 3 parts. We have the quality assurance person. Actually, we have a director of quality. It's called the director of quality, process improvement, and innovation, because that's all part of the standard of care. Then we have a director of risk management, all of them engineers who are looking at the risks of the project and the overall. Then we have our director of technical delivery. All 3 of these people have to work together to set firm-wide standards internally to make sure we meet the industry standard of care. So that's really important. For our subs, we now have added a provision in our subcontract in the exhibits where we're requiring them at least to be able to, if we ask them, to be able to produce what is your program. And I don't need a paper program. I need to know that you have a formalized systemic approach to producing a quality project that meets the standard of care. It's not simple, but at that, I think, is a reasonable expectation for you to have for your subs. And whenever I have a sub that tries to delete that provision of our subcontract requiring a quality management plan and a quality program, we usually won't use that sub. Because if you're saying to me that's going to add cost, no, you should have a company-wide program that's applied to your project. I don't necessarily need to have a project-specific one, but show me what's there. And if you're a client and your engineer, when they're coming for your proposals and submitting proposals, can't articulate themselves, how do you propose, giving away secrets, but remember, I come from the client side, how do you propose to make sure that you're going to meet the standard of care on this project? What's your system? You have to start talking in terms of systems, because people come and go, right? And unless you come up with a system that our firm is in a growth model, we want to make sure that the engineers that are joining the firm and the experienced engineers have a model to follow. For us, it's called Compass.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Alicia, you have anything else that you would like to add at the end?
No, thanks for calling me out. No, I don't.
Oh, no, I'm just so before we thank Jerry and we let him go, there is one more plug here, I guess we could say, and this is for our membership, really. So these slides, these are just reminders for our membership. The national website, the ACEC website, there's a lot of resources there for all of our member firms. I first got introduced to Jerry because on one of their national seminars, I took a risk management seminar. It was a 9-week online course. Jerry was one of the presenters, and he went through a lot deeper contract language, contract terms, kind of went through each, kind of provisions that are problematic and how can we combat it. These are resources that are available to us as member firms. There's educational sessions on there, and then there's live classes, and there's also on-demand classes. So really just a reminder for our membership, to use the resources there. There's also on the bottom, there's resources for things like contract language. And I'm sure Jerry probably had a lot of a part of that. And so with that, on behalf of ACEC, the Hawaii section, Jerry, we'd like to thank you for giving us your time, for presenting to everybody here. Also like to thank Alicia for agreeing to facilitate and help and participate as well. So if you guys can, please give our speaker a round of applause.
Thank you all. And Charles knows that I love hearing from you all, good, bad, or indifferent. That's what makes us better, and that's why we're committed, my firm, Kennedy Jenks, especially in the marketplace, towards having this standard of professionalism, because it'll make us all better as a profession and serve our clients and our communities. So thanks, everybody.
Yes, and as Jerry said, he did give consent for this to be recorded.
Yep.
So we will have the recording available. We'll likely put on the website. No, don't stop recording yet. I need